And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's December 31st, 365th day of the year. There are no more days remain to the end of the year. Tomorrow is January 1st. It's known by a lot of names. We're going to be talking about some of those. It's National Champagne Day. Pop open a bottle of bubbly. Add some sparkle to your day. No Gallon Road Races. Make up your mind day. No Interruptions Day. Creating a quiet bubble of concentration. Shutting out the world's noise and zero in on your task with undistracted determination. It's an unlucky day. Sometimes life can feel like a roller coaster. So embrace those challenges, learn from them, and keep pushing forward towards your goals. Hogmanay, which is one of Scotland's most anticipated celebrations, fills that country with excitement and joy. Day marks the end of the old year and the beginning of a new one. For a lot of folks, it's a time to reflect and reset and enjoy traditions passed down through the generations. The spirit of Hogmanay spreads across towns and cities with people gathering for music and fireworks and festivities. The energy is contagious as everybody comes together to embrace the fresh start that lies ahead. And, of course, it's not that's celebrated in this country. It's New Year's Eve, of course, and tomorrow's New Year's Day. Tonight there'll be fireworks and, you can toast to the past, look forward to the future with friends and loved ones. Get out the party hats and the confetti and champagne. Zagreb Advent, Kwanzaa, uniting in cultural richness, illuminating principles like unity and purpose and creativity through vibrant rituals and meaningful gatherings. Christmas Bird Count Week, Artes Mundi, and we have the Universal Hour of Peace. Join millions of folks around the world in a moment of global harmony and positivity. And Blue Christmas. Today is the last day of Blue Christmas. Well, most people are at home opening presents and getting plastered. Emergency workers are on duty, ensuring the safety of their communities. Famous people born on this date: Donald Trump Jr., Sir Anthony Hopkins, John Denver, and Val Kilmer. Well, as I said earlier, there's a lot of interesting things about December 31st, and there's a lot of different names that it's called. But we have gone through those, so now let's see what stories we have in the news today. Well, a body found in Texas field with a gun nearby is raising concern as the search continues for missing teenage girls. They were searching for a Texas teen by the name of Camila Mendoza Olmos, and they found that another Texas teenage girl had disappeared. But the body found Tuesday evening in Bexar County, Texas, certainly has upset a lot of people. Turns out there was a series of disappearances involving teen girls. All went missing within a single week. This body was found during the search for 19-year-old Camila Olmos, though police said that's too early to determine if that's her remains or not. Bexar County Sheriff Javier Salazar said during a news conference that investigators had just recently found the body in a field. They found it about 4:40 in the afternoon. Adding the medical examiner is going to determine both the identity of the body and the cause and manner of death. That body was found by a joint team of sheriff's deputies and FBI agents in an area of tall grass near a landscaping business, just a few hundred yards from almost his home. There was two other girls who was concerned about them missing. One returned, and the second one is still missing. Well, the world's most contagious virus has been detected at two major U.S. airports amid the holiday traffic. It was detected at Newark Liberty International Airport in New Jersey. A case of measles was identified in a passenger at Terminals B and C on December 12th, according to the New Jersey Department of Health press release. Measles symptoms include a high fever and a cough and a runny nose and watery red eyes and a rash that usually appears between 3 and 5 days after the symptoms begin. Usually begins with the flat red spots that appear on the face at the hairline and spread downward to the neck and torso and arms and legs and feet. The virus spreads when whoever has it coughs or sneezes. Well, Congress, as usual, has failed to deal with a major issue. They didn't save Obamacare subsidies after the shutdown fight, so premiums are going to go up. Lawmakers fought over Obamacare subsidies tooth and nail for the better part of the year, and ultimately neither side won. Senate Democrats put the government into the longest shutdown in history in an effort to refocus the narrative in Congress on health care. Republicans agreed to talk about it in the open, and both sides got a shot to advance their own side. Both failed, which is typical of Congress, especially these days. Or former GOP Senator John Kyle announces that he has a dementia diagnosis and he steps away from public life. He's 83, became one of Arizona's most prominent Republicans during a career that spanned nearly 3 decades across both chambers of Congress, including a stint as Senate Minority Whip. He said, "I was blessed to represent the people of Arizona in Congress and to have numerous other opportunities to contribute to the political and civic life of our nation and state." But he went on to say, "The time has come for me to withdraw from public life. I've been diagnosed with neurological disease manifesting as dementia." Well, it's not surprising. Folks in Congress have dementia. They've never shown normally that they're all well wrapped. Well, a Minnesota man was an associate of Shirley. In a viral video, says he filed a criminal complaint against the governor, Tim Walsh, over the daycare fraud allegations. Independent journalist Nick Shirley and his researcher, who goes by the name of David, returned to the Quality Learning Center in Minneapolis on Tuesday, dressed in a sweatshirt emblazoned with 1-800-FRAUD, following the release of his viral video alleging fraud at state-funded child care facilities in Minnesota. And at that site, David also told reporters he filed a criminal complaint against Minnesota Governor Tim Walsh that was related to the widespread fraud. In a post shared on X, they're also shown during a visit standing outside the facility in matching sweatshirts. Shirley captioned that post, "We're out here to learn and stopping fraud." Well, both men's sweatshirts also read Quality Learning Center, and misspelling it mirrored the Quality Learning Center, a misspelling that mirrored the signage associated with the Minneapolis site central to fraud allegations. Yes, those that were running that facility couldn't even spell the word learning, which of course raises a lot of questions about the folks involved. State officials and daycare manager on Monday denied allegations of fraud, disputed the claims the location was closed or improperly collecting taxpayer funds. Of course, nothing to see, just move along. Trust us. We're from the government. Well, Ted Cruz uploads on the state of college football as programs get decimated by a transfer portal. He said it's an absolute crisis. He's been trying for years now to get more regulations around the name, image, and likenesses deals in college sports. Saying back in 2023, the landscape was in peril. And now in 2025, he says college football specifically is a disaster. He responded to a post on X which called the current college football landscape unsustainable. Well, yeah, somebody said the other day, folks aren't in college anymore to learn. They're there to socialize and figure out how to make money for the future. Well, the IRS has given workers a bigger tax break for business expenses in 2026. The standard mileage rate has jumped 2.5 cents a mile. Oh, that's a lot of money, don't you know? People who use their cars for work are going to be able to deduct more money per mile on their taxes in the new year. The Internal Revenue announced this week that the standard mileage rate for business driving is going to increase by 2.5 cents a mile, as I said. Additionally, vehicles used for medical purposes will decrease by 0.5 cent, which the agency said reflects updated cost data and annual inflation adjustments. Well, the standard mileage rate is set by the IRS, which is expressed in so many cents per mile. That's used to calculate the deductible cost of using a personal vehicle for business purposes while when filing federal income taxes. That affects self-employed workers and gig workers and freelancers and small businesses who use personal vehicles for business, so they get to claim that standard mileage deduction on their tax returns. Well, a mother jumped into water to save her 4-year-old daughter that fell between a cruise ship and the dock. She jumped without hesitation after a young daughter fell between a dock and a Carnival cruise ship in the Bahamas, prompted a frantic rescue, which was captured on video. The incident unfolded near Celebration Key on Grand Bahama Island and was captured from above aboard a nearby cruise ship. Video showed workers and passengers reacting as the child and her mother were in the water alongside the Carnival Sunrise. Video was shared by TikTok user Shell Spears, who said she was aboard the Carnival Conquest when she heard screaming outside her room and realized something was wrong along the dock. She said, "I'm sitting in my room on the Carnival Conquest and there's something outside," and apparently people fell between the dock and the Carnival Sunrise. They were pulled to safety. A mother jumped in after her baby. Very scary situation. Both were rescued quickly. Well, Illinois star runs over an official in a key play, leads the team to Music City Bowl win. The Illinois Fighting Illini quarterback Luke Altmaier had an incredible night against the Texas Volunteers in a Music City Bowl win. But a play in the third quarter caught the eyes of the college football fans. The Fighting Illini were up 3 points in the third quarter and had the ball on the first down from the Volunteers' 41-yard line. Altmaier took the snap and dropped back to pass and faked the pass to his right and took the ball up the middle of the field. He scampered away from Tennessee defenders and ran right into an official. Quarterback bounced off the official and gained the first down before he ran out of bounds. It took a minute for the official to get back up. Illini went on to score a touchdown later in that drive. I can remember back when I used to play football, we had situations like that. Well, the 7 most annoying people of the year 2025 have been named. This year brought us a number of interesting things. Trump the sequel, and that meant the left had extra motivation to be annoying. Their hatred of President Trump, conservatives, and even the late Charlie Kirk actually defined 2025. There were still some who outdid themselves in their quest to be the most annoying people of 2025. Now this didn't include the folks that made news saying just one idiotic comment who are just disclosed obscure media personalities, like Matthew Dowd, who lost his bogus MSNBC job for his comments bashing Charlie Kirk. Nobody deserved the top spot on this list more than Jimmy Kimmel Live host Jimmy Kimmel. Most late-night programs have faded from view as their hosts have turned them into orgies of Trump bashing. But Kimmel excels at hating conservatives so much he almost qualifies to be a male cast member of The View. And if the annoying people of Earth have a home base, it's not on some secluded island fortress, it's ABC's The View. And this gaggle of hosts from the leftist moderator Whoopi Goldberg to crackpot Joy Behar, to pretend conservative Lisa Farah Griffin. It's a reminder that quantity is not quality. And if you're lucky, you've never heard of podcaster Jennifer Welch. Just imagine a ghoul-like figure from your deepest nightmares. Then give her blonde hair and a microphone. One of the two co-hosts of I've Had It podcast is well named. She and her co-host have appeared on the Bravo series Sweet Home Oklahoma, which nobody heard of either. But now the press loves her because she says hateful things about conservatives. Well, podcaster anti-Semite Nick Fuentes and Twitch anti-Semite Hassan Piker showed the world that the worst users of social media have one thing in common: hatred. Both of them have dominated the social world. Been everywhere in the media as civilized society reacts in horror. Fuentes calls himself an admirer of communist Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin and says Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler was really a good guy. And Piker, when he's not being accused of giving his dog electric shock, spends his time saying offensive things like America deserved 9/11. They done walked it back because of the backlash, but still has millions of followers on multiple platforms. Well, I think my system just had a nervous breakdown. Yes, he and his cohort are called the Pod People. Well, and then singer Katy Perry had not one but two spacey experiences in 2025. Sort of went into space on a Jeff Bezos rocket. Owner of Amazon, the Washington Post sent his then fiancee Lauren Sanchez and 5 other famous women into near space. At least that's the story. The jury's still out on that. Perry's in with the Cool Kids Club, so she got to go. She actually vowed to put the A in astronaut. Made a fool of herself as she landed, kneeling and kissing the ground because of an 11-minute rocket trip. She's quoted as saying, I feel super connected to love. Well, that must have been true. She's now dating her own space cadet, former lefty Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And in Cynthia Erivo's 2025's It Girl, she's everywhere and impossible not to see. As NBC put it, she's proudly bald and doesn't have any eyebrows. Throw in nails like Freddy Krueger and the bisexual star is everything the media world wants in a celebrity. She's weird and alternative. She's the star of the 2 Wicked movies, even plays Jesus in the Hollywood Bowl version of the musical Jesus Christ Superstar. And she revels in her unusual looks, even shaving her own eyebrows. Whenever I'm talking to my makeup artist, I tell her I just want to look like a pretty thumb. And of course, the 2024 Democratic election day debate wasn't enough for Vice President Kamala Harris. Recently declared, I'm not done. I've lived my entire career in life of service, and it's in my bones. And she's released her book, 107 Days. Managed to annoy Democrats and Republicans about equally with her alleged recollection of events, which of course is not really that grounded in reality. She'll make us endure a lot more in the garbled responses before she goes quietly into that good night of her career. Well, there's a lot of strange people in this world. Minnesota's new Medicaid fraud prevention fix don't make any difference, according to a former FBI agent. Minnesota officials are adding an extra layer of verification to payments from high-risk Medicaid programs. That's a move one former law enforcement official says won't make any difference, as federal authorities allege taxpayers in that state have lost more than $9 billion to fraud since 2018 alone. Well, on that note, let us see what other stories we have. Fraud is running rampant. We got crazy people running around, people who claim to have been to space who just clearly act like space cadets. Well, ISIS is exploiting Syria's chaos as U.S. strikes expose a growing threat. U.S. and partner forces killed or captured nearly 25 Islamic State operatives in Syria in days after a large-scale U.S.-led strike on December 19th. That's according to a new statement from U.S. Central Command, underscoring Washington's assessment that ISIS remains an active and persistent threat inside the country. CENTCOM said those forces conducted 11 follow-up missions on December 20th and 29th, killing at least 7 ISIS members, capturing the remainder and eliminating 4 ISIS weapons caches. The operations followed Operation Hawkeye Strike when U.S. and Jordanian forces hit more than 70 ISIS targets across central Syria, using over 100 precision munitions, destroyed infrastructure and weapons sites linked to that group. Well, some things just will not go away. Well, Mamdami's back in the news, or still in the news, I should say. He's PIC's educator and worked to dismantle gifted and talented programs in New York City schools chancellor. He's expected to announce he's going to appoint Kamar Samuels, a longtime New York City educator and Manhattan superintendent, as the next school's chancellor, according to multiple reports. Samuels has been an educator within New York City public schools for almost 2 decades, is known for promoting racial diversity through school mergers and working to dismantle the gifted and talented program, which some critics argue is racially based, according to the New York Post. The school's chancellor oversees the nation's largest public school system, educating more than 900,000 students across 1,600 schools and employing roughly 135,000 people, if you call it education. He led school mergers aimed at racial integration while overseeing a de Blasio administration effort to increase diversity in certain Brooklyn middle schools. That's according to Chalkbeat. According to the Post, Samuels also backed the International Baccalaureate program, which he said aligns with his philosophy of expanding opportunities for students while investing in teachers. In other words, let's hire a few more of my friends for do-nothing jobs. Well, Senator Eric Smith on the Ingram angle said the situation with the fraud in Minnesota is now about prosecution. The question of whether or not there's fraud seems to have been long since been answered. Well, a man can't seem to get rid of a massive squatter on his property. He's got a bear that lives under his house, and nobody can get the bear to come out. Well, Politico reporters was torched after saying Minnesota daycares may invoke the stand your ground laws regarding journalists. If you remember, the stand your ground laws means you can defend, even using deadly force, your property. And he seems to be urging folks who run the daycares to use deadly force against journalists, which has got to be one of the craziest statements of the year. Well, Heidi Klum ditched her bikini top in St. Bart's as stars escaped the winter with sun-soaked getaways. And the photos that appeared in the news certainly were worth looking at. The young man she's with seemed to be trying to hide his face, but she wasn't hiding anything. All right. Well, President Trump's military muscles were flexed, as I said in an earlier story. B-2 bombers led to national security successes, especially in Syria. Well, let's see, is there anything else? There were 5 jaw-dropping criminal cases that proved 2025 was stranger than fiction. The United States versus Luigi Mangione. Murder charge rocked the country at the end of last year, with a highly publicized case playing out in 2025. Luigi Mangione was taken into federal custody December 19, 2024, and charged with stalking and murder United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. The crime was committed in the middle of the day when Thompson was walking in Midtown Manhattan. Let's see. Then we got the state of Pennsylvania versus Brian Kohlberger. This is known as the Idaho student murder trial. The case began in 2022 when Brian Kohlberger was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary involving a group of students attending the University of Idaho. At the time, Kohlberger, who was a first-semester doctoral student in criminology at the university, was appointed a public defender held without bond in the Monroe County Correctional Facility. Trial was scheduled for August 2025, though Kohlberger agreed to a plea deal just weeks before it was set to begin. Well, then the U.S. versus Sean Combs. It's a case that made headlines for months involving alleged incidents and criminal activity spanning several decades against music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. It concluded July 2nd, 2025. Some of the charges included sex trafficking and racketeering, conspiracy, and transportation for the purposes of prostitution, the last of which he was found guilty by a jury. Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Karen Reed, publicly controversial case that led to news documentaries and specials. Karen Reed stood trial this year for the murder of her boyfriend, a Boston police officer, was found dead in the snow outside a house party in 2022. And number 5, people of the state of Colorado versus James Craig. In the crime worthy of a thriller, Colorado dentist James Craig is found guilty of murder July 30, 2025. Now that stemmed from charges filed against him in 2023, accused of fatally poisoning his wife with protein shakes by adding cyanide and tetrahydrozoline, a substance commonly found in eye drops. The prosecution's investigation revealed financial trouble and an affair with another woman as the motive for the murder. There's always something interesting going on, don't you know? Well, we've been talking about a lot of strange stories. And yesterday we talked about the Knights of the Golden Circle, a mysterious organization. And we're going to start out today talking about an unsolved skyjacking. On November 24th, 1971, a passenger using the name of Dan Cooper hijacked Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, headed from Portland to Seattle. After he threatened to blow up the plane with a bomb he said he had in his briefcase, he demanded 4 parachutes and $200,000 in cash. Now, I'd have just offered him a check personally. Maybe he'd have taken it. I could have given him ID. Fearing the worst, of course, Northwest Airlines caved. Once on the ground in Seattle, Cooper let the other passengers and some of the flight crew off the plane and had the money and the parachutes brought on board. Plane is refueled and took off again, and at 10,000 feet, Cooper jumped from the back stairs of the Boeing 727 into the Pacific Northwest night. Never seen again. Now, the press began calling the skyjacker D.B. Cooper. FBI investigated thousands of leads. Suspect included a mass murderer, a college professor, a career criminal, and a World War II veteran. But everybody was ruled out as a culprit. But over the last 40 years, new suspects have emerged. Now we have an examined lead that may point to an inside job. Now, one of the first steps to be taken in a situation like this is figuring out who he was and how he may have managed to pull off this unbelievable stunt without ever getting caught. I mean, literally, he pulled off the perfect crime. And to this day, it's one of America's greatest unsolved robberies. But an author named Robert Blevins wrote a book called Into the Blast and presented an interesting lead. Kenneth Peter Christensen, former Northwest Airlines employee, was never really a formal suspect in the D.B. Cooper case. Now, D.B. Cooper is what the media called him. Dan Cooper is what his paperwork said. But thanks to Into the Blast, Kenny Christensen's come to the forefront of possible suspects. And Blevins makes an interesting case. He said, I'm 90% to 95% certain Christensen was D.B. Cooper. He worked for the airline, he had paratrooper training, had the opportunity, had a lot of unexplained spending within a few months after the hijacking. Lent his best friend's sister $5,000 in cash to buy a house. Used another $16,000 to buy another house for himself. And as far as anybody can tell, Christensen had one life before the hijacking and a completely different one afterwards. When you look at the numbers, you definitely start smelling something fishy. While looking at Northwest Airlines, Christensen never earned more than $512 a month, which even in the early 1970s didn't go that far. But within a few months of the skyjacking, he had all kinds of money to throw around. So the question was asked, why didn't the FBI take a harder look at Christensen as a suspect? Well, Blevins chalks that oversight up to three preconceptions the FBI brought to that case. Number one, Christensen didn't match the eyewitness descriptions of the skyjacker. Two, he didn't have any previous criminal history. And three, the FBI didn't believe the skyjacker had military training or military background. Now, the name DB may belong to the most famous skyjacker in history, but it's actually a fabrication invented by the press. Though nobody seems to know where it originated. And as for the skyjacker himself, he actually put the name Dan Cooper on his ticket, name that a lot of folks think he got from this Franco-Belgian comic book. So we're going to look at the evidence piece by piece, starting with what, to many folks, is the most glaring question. Why would the FBI think that D.B. Cooper didn't have any military training? Well, according to Blevin, the parachute that D.B. Cooper actually jumped with is called a Navy Backpack 6. It's a smaller parachute, more of a military type. Skyjacker was apparently a pretty tough guy. Kenny Christensen went through paratrooper training, where they started out with 262 men and ended up with 80 that actually finished, and he was one of that 80. Now, all these factors have convinced Blevins that he's cracked the D.B. Cooper case, and he's got very few doubts that Christensen is actually the culprit. He says he thinks he jumped out of the back of the 727, hit the ground, popped off his parachute, disconnected the harness and container from it, buried the silk, and put his briefcase and money bag into the container for the parachute, put it on his back, and walked out of the woods. Well, at first look, Blevin's case is mostly circumstantial, which means we need to look at the other pieces of evidence and the circumstances to tell whether Christensen was actually D.B. Cooper. Well, the trail to investigate whether D.B. Cooper really was the late Kenny Christensen's led us from writer Robert Blevins to Kenny's brother Lyle, who dropped an amazing bombshell when he was talked to. According to Lyle, when talking about his brother Kenny, who died in 1994, according to Lyle, before he passed away, Kenny called him to his bedside and said, "There's something you should know, but I can't tell you." And that's the part where everybody began to put the pieces together. And you know how they say don't believe everything you hear? Well, there's only one exception to that, and that's a deathbed confession. And that's the reason Blevins is so obsessed with the case and with Kenny Christensen. After his near confession, Lyle spent years thinking about Kenny's life, decided he needed to examine his brother's possessions much more carefully. According to Lyle, on that fateful day, the skyjacker came on the airline with an attaché case, and I found that very same attaché case in Kenny's final effects. But I've got one or two of those. That doesn't mean I was D.B. Cooper. And Lyle started looking at the composite sketch the law enforcement put together. And the descriptions of D.B. Cooper when he boarded that flight were all the same, wearing a black suit with a tie, carrying a briefcase, described as tall and dark-haired. And the FBI bulletin featured a sketch based on eyewitness reports. But then someone turned up with a photo of Kenny Christensen. He said he found this picture in his photo book. Must have looked at the photo book a lot of times, never caught it. And one day I said, "Wait a minute, carrying a bag, looks like a bag of money, and he's got the attaché case in his hand." Now that didn't make him guilty. In fact, Dan Cooper, that boarded that flight wearing a black suit and tie and carrying a briefcase, was described by eyewitnesses as having dark hair, around and being in his 40s and about 5'10" to 6 feet tall. Kenny Christensen was bald and stood 5'8", so the physical description really doesn't match. But you have to remember that eyewitness accounts are fairly unreliable, dubious at best. The other thing we know, Lyle said Kenny used to wear a toupee prior to the skyjacking, but never wore it again after the skyjacking. Again, circumstantial, to be sure, but we need something that's a lot more concrete than that. But the skyjacker was left-handed, and so was Kenny Christensen. On the plane, the skyjacker ordered bourbon. That was Kenny Christensen's preferred drink. Skyjacker smoked. So did Kenny Christensen. But perhaps the most interesting of all was the photo that Lyle showed to Blevins and other investigators of Kenny Christensen carrying a briefcase and what looks like a paper bag full of money. At first, it seems just like any other old photo, but in this case, the picture had been in Kenny Christensen's photo album, hid behind a different, more innocuous photo. If nothing else, it was kind of creepy, hiding the photo of yourself walking in with your big bag of money. And it does make you raise your eyebrows, but even assuming all this is true, when you look at the case, it's still missing the most important thing of all. What was the motive for such an act? What would cause somebody who had been, by all accounts, a quiet man who caused very little trouble to suddenly pull off the biggest unsolved crime in American aviation history? And why mount such a crime against your own employer? Well, it turns out there's an explanation for that as well. One is found in Kenny Christensen's own handwriting. According to his letters, he was never able to earn a stable living in Northwest because of constant protracted labor disputes at his job. It seems there were 8 strikes at Northwest Airlines between 1954 and 1971. And those strikes severely cut into his earning power. Constantly having to take odd jobs like working in a hotel or digging ditches for friends just to make ends meet. And that's not a euphemism. Kenny Christensen was actually digging ditches. In the meantime, the $8 million jets he worked on sat unused on the ground, and make no mistake, this hard-working former paratrooper really resented this. If we believe that Kenny Christensen was D.B. Cooper, then by 1971 he had simply had enough and decided to strike out at the airline to make him pay for the struggles they'd put him through. So right there you got your first real motive. And then if you look at Christensen's bank statements, at the time of his death, the man who used to dig ditches had $186,000 socked away in savings and over $20,000 in his checking account. And add to that the amount he spent freely in the months after the skyjacking, you'd get another big piece of the puzzle. This one's got dollar signs all over it. Still, even with the motive and the overflowing bank account, doesn't mean he was absolutely D.B. Cooper. When you stack all the pieces together, you do have to wonder, could it all be coincidence? And even more than that, why wasn't this paratrooper one of the FBI suspects? Well, one of the big questions that came up in regard to this case, whether or not D.B. Cooper could survive the jump out of the back of the airplane. Former FBI agent Ralph Himmersbach said he thought it was highly unlikely. But in April 1972, a man named Richard McCoy skyjacked United Airlines 727 and demanded $500,000. He jumped out of the back of the plane at 16,000 feet while the plane was traveling 200 miles an hour. He survived. Similarities to the Cooper case were such that authorities thought for a while that McCoy was D.B. Cooper. But McCoy didn't resemble the descriptions of Cooper at all, and turned out he'd been home having Thanksgiving dinner in Utah when Cooper pulled off his caper. But the point of it is if McCoy could survive a jump from 6,000 feet higher than Cooper, no way to just dismiss Cooper's jump and say it's unlikely he survived. Now, of course, all this information was taken to the FBI, and they said that D.B. Cooper case was never solved. As a result, it's still an open investigation. But something did come out of that contact with the FBI. Ralph Himmersbach, a retired FBI agent, was actually in charge of the Cooper investigation from 1971 to 1980. He described the night of the skyjacking as stormy and windy and rainy, lousy night for flying, but much less for jumping out of a jet airplane. So to help reconstruct the crime and understand how the FBI saw it, Himmersbach arranged for investigators to accompany him on a Boeing 727 in 1971, the most widely flown airliner in the world. Dan Cooper, who wouldn't become D.B. Cooper until a news story gave those initials in the days after the skyjacking, was in seat 18C. And as a flight attendant approached him, he handed her a note. He said, "You better read this, miss. I've got a bomb." Told her to take that note up to the cockpit, and his instructions to him was to stay in the air until they got to Seattle while the money and the parachutes were obtained. And he said if they did anything wrong, he'd set off the bomb. At this point, we know where D.B. Cooper was sitting. We know about the note, the demands it made. When the FBI asked the airliner how they wanted to deal with the hijacker, the head of the airline was determined to keep everybody safe. They agreed to pay the ransom, handed over the 4 parachutes the hijacker wanted. At that point, the hijacker selected an older-style military parachute of the sort that Kenny Christensen might have been familiar with. Then he opened the rear door of the 727, and at 10,000 feet, he jumped. And that's why last anybody knew about Dan Cooper. Former agent Himmersbach thinks Cooper didn't survive the jump. He said, "I can't say it wasn't survivable, but it's unlikely. That airline was going 170 knots at 10,000 feet. Outside air temperature was 7 degrees below zero with a chill factor of about 69 degrees below zero. Now, that is a strong point, no question about it. But it didn't answer the most important question, the question people have been asking for 4 decades. If Cooper didn't survive the jump, why was no trace ever found of his body? Well, the best explanation anybody had is somewhere in the woods. And that's the FBI's explanation. D.B. Cooper died in the jump. His body is claimed by some animal in the woods, and his clothing, parachute, and all that money lost to time and the elements. And as for why they didn't think he was a Northwest Airlines employee, according to the FBI, he'd have been recognized. Now, both are certainly solid explanations. They're just not explanations that everybody bought. It appears, and a lot of folks believe, the FBI underestimated just how smart a guy D.B. Cooper was, and just how carefully he prepared his heist. He insisted that the pilot stay below 10,000 feet. Any higher, and they'd have to pressurize the cabin, making it even harder for Cooper to open the plane's rear door and escape. He also asked that the flaps, those things on the wings and that go up and down, that take off and landing, he asked they be set exactly 15 degrees. Why, you might ask? At that angle, the 727 couldn't fly any faster than 200 miles per hour, making it easier for Cooper to jump out. So anyway you cut it, this guy knew what he was doing. He knew about planes. He knew how they worked. He certainly used that knowledge to his advantage. And of course, the question of jumping out of an aircraft at 10,000 feet is certainly one that has to be addressed. Larry Yount is a parachute expert with more than 200 military jumps, more than 4,000 civilian jumps. While he's never jumped from a plane moving at 200 miles per hour, civilian skydivers normally jump from planes traveling at about 90 miles per hour. He's made military jumps from aircraft that are traveling at speeds up to 150 miles per hour. Well, so they asked him, when D.B. Cooper jumped out of that plane, he had a big bag of money weighing 22 pounds tied to his waist. Is that too much weight? Well, Yount didn't think so. 22 pounds, it's almost inconsequential. He said he'd personally done military jumps with 150 pounds of equipment strapped to him. And I remember in airborne training, much as we hated it, all the crap we were carrying was well over 22 pounds. Taking it a step further, well, Yount was asked if they recreated the conditions, would they be willing to jump out of a 727 at 200 miles per hour at 10,000 feet? And naturally, he said yes. Then he added something else. It says if there are actually 727s in private fleets that are used for commercial skydiving, people actually pay extra money to do a jump just like D.B. Cooper did. Not only are thrill seekers surviving the Cooper jump, they're actually making it a regular practice, which kind of raises the eyebrow at the FBI's assertions that Cooper died that night. Well, beyond making the assumption that Cooper died, the FBI's other argument against Christensen is based on the belief he would have been known to the crew on Flight 705 as a Northwest Airlines employee. That's an interesting hypothesis until you take into consideration Flight 305 was a domestic flight, and much of Christensen's experience was with international routes. Back then, there wasn't a lot of intermingling between domestic and overseas crews. So if Christensen was, in fact, D.B. Cooper, he's certainly taken some risks that he might be recognized as a Northwest employee, but as he did at the plane's airspeed and altitude, it's a risk that could certainly be diminished. And so even after Christensen began throwing all that money around, after the skyjacking, he continued to work for Northwest Airlines for another 20 years. Criminal always returns to the scene of the crime is an old cliche in criminal investigation. Kenny Christensen was D.B. Cooper. Not only returned to the scene, he collected a paycheck from the same folks for close to 20 years. Well, at this point, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that points to Christensen, but actually needs some hard evidence. In the case of D.B. Cooper, hard evidence is most likely means the money. Well, on the night of that skyjacking, D.B. Cooper asked for $200,000 in $20 bills, which he got, and told her that meant he was carrying 10,000 bills divided into 100 bundles for a total package that weighed about 22 pounds. But before the money was delivered, the FBI did show some intelligence. They ran the bills through a recorder machine that took a microfilm photograph of each bill, including the serial numbers. A few months after the skyjacking, the FBI published those serial numbers, a 34-page list that showed people what to be on the alert for when a $20 bill would cross their desk. Amazingly enough, none of those bills ever showed up. But in 2008, the lucky 8-year-old boy who found the money was a grown man in his 30s. When he was talked to, a capitalist, he put some of D.B. Cooper money he found up for auction in the Dallas auction house. The bidding for the most complete bill, and they were very weathered since he found them on the riverbank, Started at $750 and finally sold for $6,572.50. Certainly an interesting price on a piece of American history. It was February 1980 when that 8-year-old boy found a bundle of waterlogged and decomposing $20 bills on the banks of the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. That spot was about 40 miles from what authorities believe would have been D.B. Cooper's landing zone. He found $5,800 in 20s, and all the serial numbers were on the FBI's list. But as far as anybody knows, this is the only confirmed incident of any of the D.B. Cooper money ever turning up. Still, even if Christensen did pull off the skyjacking, and even if he lost $5,800 of the ransom money during his escape, he still had a lot of bills he had to stash. And because the serial numbers were so well known, he couldn't exactly take that bundle of cash to the nearest bank. So if you had a ton of money sitting around, you wanted to keep it safe, where would you put it? You'd need a pretty good hiding place. Which led investigators, not the FBI, but civilian investigators, to the house that Christensen bought in Washington State not long after the skyjacking took place. Today, that house he bought has been converted into a print shop, but according to the current owner, Dan Rattenberry, the printing company in the first commercial business to be located in that converted house, which was sold a dozen or so years ago. So the question that Rattenberry was asked was, had he found any money on that property? Rattenberry said, I haven't, but people have. He said, people found money on the property, and the owner I bought it from bulldozing all the trees around here. They unknowingly unearthed some kind of plastic bag. It was ripped open from being dragged through the stumps, but kids are playing in the stumps, and they found a bag and had a lot of money in it. On the property it used to belong to Kenny Christensen. When they bulldozed the trees, they unearthed bags with money in it. Probably it's just local urban myth, but it was also enough to make folks bring in a modern infrared specialist who can scan the house and tell us if there's anything hidden in Christensen's old house. And that's where things got truly strange, according to investigators. On the night when the team was scanning Kenny Christensen's old house with infrared, the director said, we don't need you anymore, we probably won't find anything. And so they had a long-distance phone call going between the lead investigator and the team that was examining the house. Well, finally, due to the late hour, they broke the connection. And a few minutes later, the team at the Christensen house called back and said, we did find something. At the back of the copy shop, the team was running a thermal scan on the walls and ceilings of what used to be Kenny Christensen's bedroom. Now, in most spots, the thermal image read red, showed normal insulation. And suddenly it turned blue, turning up one interesting spot directly above the bedroom, a spot where the insulation appeared to be far less thick than in the rest of the ceiling. Well, at the time they found it, nobody thought much about it. Probably just a break in the insulation. So one of the team members decided to go up into the attic and investigate. And according to his own words, he said there's a lot of insulation, definitely, in some stuff pushed aside. And right where they saw it on infrared, it looked like it was something else. Didn't see any money, but looks like you can lift up the flooring. So you lifted up a piece of flooring and a little space there where something absolutely could have been hidden. Almost like a little hiding space. And it's actually right above the bedroom where Kenny Christensen slept. Even though there's nothing there now, it would have been an excellent place for hiding the money. So unless you've got a secret trap door above the ceiling of your bedroom, this is certainly something unusual. Well, according to another individual, Kenny Christensen wrote a lot of letters to his family. And he mentioned the name Bernie Guessman, somebody important to Christensen. But there was a chance that Guessman could also have been important to D.B. Cooper. According to Blevins, goes so far as to accuse Guessman of being Cooper's Christensen's accomplice. And what would an accomplice have done? Probably drove Cooper down to the Portland International Airport, dropped him off to catch the flight to Seattle, and drove back up by himself to Paradise Point State Park. That's right next to the freeway and Battleground, less than 2 miles from where they found that money in 1980. So the theory was that Guessman is the one that helped Christensen escape. According to Blevins, Bernie just waited for Kenny, and Kenny jumped out, hiked out, back up to the freeway, and they met up, and only about a 12 or 13-mile walk. And it's not a big wilderness like everybody seems to think it was. Well, Bernie Guessman and Kenny Christensen knew each other for a long time. They worked side by side for the airline, refueling planes till Kenny moved to a job as a purser in Northwest Tokyo flight. At one point, Christensen was renting a room from Bernie and his wife. Kenny attended Bernie's wedding. They played cards together. Bernie and Kenny were close friends for almost 40 years. Still, Guessman had a reputation for being tight-lipped. Wanted talking about Kenny Christensen for a long time. But eventually, all the evidence came together. There's no definitive proof that Kenny Christensen was D.B. Cooper, but the evidence is there. And the man suddenly went from having nothing to having all kinds of money. And since $200,000, when you think about it, is really not a lot of money. But if you're going to get by with $512 a month, it seemed like an unbelievable fortune. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to do a New Year's show. So until tomorrow at this time, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great and enjoyable New Year's Eve. Try not to blow yourself up with the fireworks. And we'll talk to you tomorrow.